Hey, it's Sam. I'm going to talk today about the untimely death of Philip Seymour Hoffman, the popular actor who died of an overdose on February 2nd, 2014. You know, we all have our karma, and some of our karma revolves around things like addictions. There's a lot of addiction in the world and addictive personalities, especially with things like, there are literally like addictive additives in our food. Even additive comes from addict. Things that are added to our food which are addictive substances. There's all kinds of stimulation and media that we can be addicted to. There's, of course, things like food and sex and even like, love addictions where we're just kind of mesmerized and hypnotized by things. We all have a lot to manage when we come into this world. Sometimes people forget that astrology shows all of this. It's nothing outside of the realm of karma. And managing addictions or things like that is very much a part of, for instance, what I've done as an astrologer, the thousands of readings that I do. I've certainly done the charts of many, alcoholics and drug addicts who manage their addictions and stay sober, have relapses and go back and forth. But, it's obviously tragic when we fail to live up to our own standard of sobriety and consciousness as a being. No one wants to be an addict. And of course, when an addict does relapse, like Mr. Hoffman did, it's tragic when it ends in an untimely and surprising death. Obviously, he didn't plan to OD. It wasn't a suicide. He just made a choice to start using again. And some people have a problem with that. I've actually voiced those kinds of feelings as like, well, an addict doesn't choose it. They can't help it. But yes, you can. We do choose it. Everything is a choice, and our karma is the result of those choices as they magnify over time. We can have compassion for the addict and also realize that the addict chooses to use again, just like he chose to get into rehab before, just like he chose in May 2013 to get back into rehab when he started to relapse. Unfortunately, he chose of late to use again, and this was a choice that ultimately did him in. And it's obviously very sad. It's sad for him. It's sad for his kids. His kids have to grow up without a father. And, we can have compassion for that and also acknowledge that this is the part of karma. Karma is not lording over us like some sort of, sword of Damocles. When people come to me for readings, if I were to say, well, you're an addict and you're just going to use and there's nothing you can do about it, that would be a horrible way to do astrology, and it's also not true. Just like with Philip Hoffman, an astrologer would know that this is going to be a very challenging time, and you're going to be tempted to use again and tempted to relapse. So you need to be very vigilant about this time and get into rehab, and anytime you see this temptation, you need to be very careful because it's a very dangerous time for you. Now, obviously we know this because of the result. What's interesting, and one of the things, as an astrologer, is I look in someone's chart and see what's going on. Now, we don't have an accurate birth time for Hoffman. We don't really know the time of birth. We do know that he has Rahu in Aries, that's the North Node. He's got Mercury in Gemini in Ardra Nakshatra. The Sun and Jupiter are in Cancer. Venus is in Leo. Ketu and Mars are in Libra. The Moon is either in Capricorn or Aquarius. I'll talk about that in a minute. And Saturn is in Pisces. Now, he has a very kind of either sort of Cancerian, lunar type of look, or maybe a Jupiterian kind of look because he's a big guy. Some people I've heard speculate that maybe it's, that he has a Cancer rising because of that, Jupiter and Sun in Cancer. That's a little hard though, because with the Cancer rising, Jupiter in the first would really make it, his lack of confidence, or the confidence issues and the depression and also the standards of conduct is not really often like a Jupiter in the first house, especially if it's Jupiter in Cancer, the ninth lord, with the Sun. I also prefer, or I think that the Moon is much more likely to be in Aquarius rather than Capricorn, because when the Moon moves into Aquarius, it takes away the aspect from Jupiter. Now, if the Moon is in Cancer, which would be earlier in the day, there would be what's called a Gajakeshara yoga, at least it's possible. You would at least have the Moon and Jupiter in an angle from each other. Now when you get the Moon and Jupiter in an angle from each other, in an aspect especially like this, it's called Gajikeshwar Yoga if they're in angular houses. But any aspect of Jupiter onto the Moon gives the grace of Jupiter, which is the grace of good judgment, the grace of guru and great teachings, and often it's much more protective. When the Moon moves into Aquarius, there winds up being an aspect from Venus, which is definitely a placement for indulgence at times, for sure. And also you get Saturn rising after the Moon, which makes a person introspective, and at best it can make them very kind of solitary and very hermit-like and go off into depression when Saturn is after the Moon, which would happen in his case if it goes into Aquarius. Now, I tend to favor the Sagittarius ascendant, at least in general. It looks very strong. One of the main reasons is because of the dashas, because when you get a Sagittarius rising sign, this would be at about 6:20 p.m. on July 23rd, 1967, you get about a 2-degree Sagittarius rising. Now, one thing that makes this compelling is the dashas, because this means that in May 2013, with that rising sign, he would have went into Saturn-Moon dasha. Now, Saturn-Moon dasha would be activating the Karaka of death, which is Saturn, which, of course, he would have been in Saturn dasha for quite a while, though, but the Moon, Saturn-Moon, Moon is the 8th house ruler, which is the house of addiction. It's the house of death, definitely a house of drug relapse. And the Moon also rules his natal planet, Jupiter, which, if he has a Sagittarius rising, then Saturn-Moon also activates his Lagna Lord, his ruling planet, in the 8th. So again, when you get Sagittarius ascendant, then you get the ruling planet in the 8th, which shows a very kind of transformative, intense life, and definitely a life where someone could die tragically, especially if the ruler of the ruling planet is running. And Saturn-Moon would be very, very possible in having someone die this way. I mean, these kind of events are very, something is going to be shown that absolutely triggers the event. And I haven't seen other dashas line up as compelling as this one, especially based on the dasha sequence and his life. He looks like someone who had an 8th house ruling planet. He also looks like someone who has a lot of Jupiterian energy. He's a very inspiring figure. Even now in death, he's like been really sort of deified, very Jupiterian-like, and he died tragically. So very compelling with that early Sagittarius Saturn-Moon dasha starting in May 2013. Now that's when he relapsed again. He checked himself into rehab in May 2013. That would have been right when Saturn-Moon started. And he died in Saturn-Moon dasha. He hadn't hit Saturn-Mars yet. Now, we want to look at things like the transits and what's happening in the sky. The most compelling transit is that the nodes have returned. Rahu and Ketu have returned to the opposite of their natal position. So when he was born, Ketu and Rahu were 9 degrees of Libra and Aries, but he had Ketu in Libra and Rahu in Aries. Well, that's reversed now. Rahu just went over his natal Ketu and his natal Mars within the last month or so. And also retrograde Jupiter had gone over his Mercury in Ardra. Now again, this is very compelling that Mercury in Ardra becomes a strong Marika planet, killer planet if it's a Sagittarius rising sign, because the lords of the 2nd and the 7th house are Marikas, are killers. So retrograde Jupiter would have just gone over that 7th house Marika planet Mercury within the last few weeks. Again, this is a very dangerous time, and any astrologer, if that's the ascendant, would say this is a very dangerous time. In addition, that Sagittarius rising sign puts Saturn in the 4th house, which is a well-known place for depression as well. So again, this is a very tragic situation, and it's very sad that he couldn't overcome his addiction and his compulsion to use again, and that it wound up taking his life and making it so his kids grow up without a father. So, our hearts go out to everyone concerned. And I just wanted to make this quick update also to look at his chart and use it at least as a kind of way to maybe give an example of how you might approach a rectification. I'm not saying this is absolutely right, but there's a very strong case in my mind for the Sagittarius. Lines up with his life, with these dashas, and I just wanted to share that with you. So leave me some comments. Let me know what you think about this.